Your dead grandfather's worthless dirt is about to become something magnificent. So shut up and be grateful we're even letting you stay. Margaret Whitmore stood in the middle of my cornfield, her Prada heels sinking into the freshly tilled soil I'd spent 3 days preparing. Behind her, 200 people applauded, like she'd just announced world peace. The morning sun glinted off the bulldozers, already tearing through 40 years of my family's labor, turning golden wheat fields into strips of black asphalt. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with crushed corn stalks filled the air. My hands clenched into fists as Margaret adjusted her pearl necklace, that practiced politician's smile spreading across her face like oil on water. She was 58 years old, had been HOA president for 7 years, and carried herself like she owned every blade of grass in Oklahoma. "The community has voted," Margaret continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. 87% approval. Democracy wins, Mr. Bennett. My name is Jackson Bennett, 35 years old, former investment banker, current owner of 47 acres of farmland I'd bought at a foreclosure auction exactly 72 hours ago. I'd left Manhattan thinking I was escaping the sharks of Wall Street. Turns out, the predators in small-town Oklahoma wore pearls and carried clipboards instead of briefcases. Margaret didn't know that 3 years ago. My old company bought an entire airfield in a deal that went sideways. If you're watching and you've ever been bulldozed by an HOA like this, smash that like button right now. Let me know I'm not alone in this fight. Subscribe to see Margaret discover the truth about what she's really building on. And if you want to help me document this whole mess for the lawsuit that's coming, the thanks button below will fund the security cameras I'm installing everywhere. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what happens next. The crowd behind Margaret consisted mostly of retirees and stay-at-home parents, the kind of people who had nothing better to do at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday than watch their HOA president destroy someone else's property. Some held signs reading, "Progress Overpassed," and "Aviation Community Now." One elderly man actually had a foam finger pointing skyward. "This isn't your land to develop," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. "I have the deed right here." Margaret's laugh sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, Mr. Bennett, you have a deed to a farm. We have a vision for a community. Which do you think matters more in the grand scheme of things?" She turned to address her audience, arms spread wide like a televangelist. "For too long, this patch of dirt has been a blight on our neighborhood. Untended fields, broken fences, a reminder of failure." She glanced back at me. "Your grandfather couldn't make it work. The previous owner couldn't make it work. And looking at you, fresh off the boat from New York City, I doubt you'll make it work either." The crowd murmured their agreement. Someone actually shouted, "Amen?" Which would have been funny if my blood pressure wasn't approaching stroke levels. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't just bought this farm on a whim. The foreclosure auction had been a gift from the universe, or maybe a curse, depending on how you looked at it. $142,000 for 47 acres of prime farmland sold because the previous owner couldn't keep up with the mysteriously increasing property taxes and HOA fines. The morning I'd arrived 3 days ago, the place looked like a photograph from the Depression era. Grass up to my knees, a mailbox hanging by a single screw, fence posts leaning at angles that defied physics. But there was something else, something that hadn't shown up in the auction photos. Fresh orange survey markers planted throughout the property. The kind surveyors use for major construction projects. Now I understood why the deal had been so good. This wasn't a failed farm looking for a new beginning. This was a targeted acquisition, and I'd walked right into the middle of someone else's plan. Margaret pulled out a folder thick enough to kill a small animal and waved it at me. "Mr. Bennett, this contains 47 signatures from property owners in the surrounding area, each one supporting the development of the Thunder Ridge aviation community. Your little vegetable patch is standing in the way of progress." "It's corn," I said. and soybeans. And it's mine. Not for long. She pulled out a document and held it up for everyone to see. This is a notice of eminent domain proceedings. The greater good of the community supersedes individual property rights. I actually laughed. You're not a government entity. You can't claim eminent domain. Her smile widened. Can't we? Our HOA has been recognized by the county as a quasi-governmental organization. We provide services, maintain infrastructure, and represent the collective will of the community. You collect fees and harass people about their mailbox colors. We maintain standards. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Sell to me now for $200,000, or watch the value drop to nothing when we make your life unbearable. That was $58,000 more than I'd paid. But something about her confidence, her absolute certainty that she'd already won, made me suspicious. Nobody offers that much over purchase price unless they know something you don't. I'll pass, I said. She shrugged like she'd expected that answer. Your funeral? Then louder to the crowd. Construction begins immediately. Our runway will be operational within 30 days. The crowd erupted in celebration. Champagne bottles appeared from nowhere, popping like gunfire. Margaret climbed onto a makeshift platform someone had set up, raising a glass of champagne to toast their victory over the outsider who dared to own land they wanted. As the bulldozers roared to life, tearing into the eastern edge of my property, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might be able to explain what was happening. Bradley Morrison, my former colleague from the investment firm, picked up on the second ring. Jackson, how's retirement treating you? It's complicated. Quick question. Do you remember that Thunder Ridge deal from 2019, the Airfield acquisition? Sure, what about it? What happened to it after the deal fell apart? I could hear him typing on his keyboard. Let me check. Okay, so we bought it for the cargo hub project. But when that fell through, it just sat there. Why? Who owns it now? Hold on, that's weird. According to this, when Steel Holdings dissolved last year, the assets were distributed to the principal partners. You should have gotten. Jackson, are you sitting down? My heart started pounding. Why? According to this, you own Thunder Ridge Airfield. It was part of your severance package. 500 acres, including 2 runways, 15 hangars, and a control tower. Didn't you read the asset transfer documents? The phone nearly slipped from my hand. The 400-page document my lawyer had given me when I left the firm. I'd skimmed it, signed where they told me to sign, focused mainly on the cash payout and stock options. Who reads 400 pages of legal documents? Bradley, where exactly is Thunder Ridge Airfield? About 2 miles west of County Road 47, Jackson. That's worth about $12 million if you developed it properly. 2 miles west of County Road 47. 2 miles west of where I was standing right now, watching Margaret Whitmore tear up my farm to build a runway. I have to go, I said, hanging up before Bradley could respond. The next few hours were a blur of destruction and revelation. While the construction crew tore into my fields, I drove west, following the barely visible dirt road that wound through a thick line of trees. What I found on the other side made my jaw drop. Thunder Ridge Airfield sprawled out before me like a small city. 2 concrete runways crossed each other in an X pattern, weeds growing through the cracks, but the foundation still solid. 15 metal hangars stood in rows, their doors rusted but intact. A control tower rose from the center, its windows broken, but its structure sound. A sign by the entrance, faded but legible, read, Property of Steel Holdings, LLC, no trespassing. I owned this. I'd owned it for a year without knowing it existed, and Margaret Whitmore was destroying my farm to build an illegal runway that would connect to my airfield. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just building a runway, she was building a connection to what she thought was an abandoned airfield, planning to claim it as part of her aviation community. The survey markers on my farm, the confidence in her offers, the speed of the construction. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years. I drove back to the farm to find the destruction had accelerated. A strip of land 50 feet wide had been cleared and leveled, running from the eastern edge of my property straight toward the tree line that hid the airfield. Workers were laying down gravel, the foundation for asphalt that would come next. Margaret stood at the edge of the work zone, talking animatedly with a man in a suit who was taking notes. As I approached, I heard her say, "Phase 2 begins once we secure the airfield. I have investors ready to put in $3 million for hangar development." "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, and both of them turned to look at me. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Bennett. You had your chance to cooperate. I'm curious about something. This runway you're building, where exactly does it lead?" Her eye twitched slightly. "It's a community airstrip. It doesn't need to lead anywhere." "Really?" "Because it seems to be aimed directly at Thunder Ridge Airfield." The man in the suit looked confused. "I thought you said the HOA had secured Thunder Ridge." Margaret's face flushed. "We have an understanding with the relevant parties." "Which parties would those be?" I asked. "Because, according to county records, Thunder Ridge is owned by Steel Holdings, LLC. "A defunct company," Margaret said quickly. "The property is essentially abandoned. Adverse possession laws will allow us to claim it for community use." I smiled. "Interesting legal theory. How long does adverse possession take in Oklahoma?" The man in the suit answered before Margaret could stop him. 15 years of continuous, open, notorious use." 15 years, I repeated. "And how long has that airfield been sitting there unused?" Margaret's jaw clenched. "That's none of your concern." "Actually, it is." I pulled out my phone, showing them a photo I had just taken of the Thunder Ridge sign. "See that LLC name? Steel Holdings? I was a principal partner. When the company dissolved, I inherited its assets." The color drained from Margaret's face so fast I thought she might faint. The man in the suit took a step back, suddenly very interested in checking his phone. "You're lying," Margaret said, but her voice cracked. "County records are public. Mrs. Whitmore, feel free to check. In the meantime, you're building a runway on my farm to connect to my airfield without my permission. That sounds like trespassing and destruction of property to me." The man in the suit excused himself and practically ran to his car. Margaret stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Behind her, the construction crew continued their work, oblivious to the fact that their entire project had just hit a $12 million wall. "You need to stop this construction immediately," I said. Margaret's shock transformed into rage. "You think you're clever? You think you've won something? I've been planning this for 3 years. I have investors, government contacts, a vision for this community that will transform property values for everyone. Except for the people you force out to make it happen. The previous owner of this farm was a drunk and a failure. He deserved to lose it. And what did the Hendersons deserve? The Johnsons? How many other families have you pushed out with your fines and your harassment?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I'm trying to build something magnificent here. A flying community that will put this nowhere town on the map. You're standing in the way of history." "I'm standing on my own land for now." She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly, but mistakes happen in construction. Pipes get broken. Foundations get undermined. Accidents occur. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You can't watch this property 24/7. You can't stop progress with a piece of paper that says you own something. Possession is 9/10 of the law, Mr. Bennett. And right now, I possess the support of this entire community. As if to emphasize her point, 3 more trucks pulled up, loaded with construction equipment. Workers began unloading barriers, cones, and signs. One sign read, "Future home of Thunder Ridge Aviation Community, a Margaret Whitmore development." She was doubling down, betting that she could overwhelm me with sheer force of will and machinery. What she didn't understand was that I'd spent 10 years on Wall Street dealing with people who thought money and connections could override law and logic. I'd seen billion-dollar deals collapse because someone forgot to check property ownership. I'd watched CEOs go to prison for less than what Margaret was attempting right now. That evening, as the construction crews finally went home, I sat on the porch of my rundown farmhouse and made a decision. I could reveal everything immediately. Shut down the construction with legal notices and sheriff's deputies. Or I could let Margaret continue digging her hole, documenting every illegal action, every fraudulent claim, every penny she collected from investors based on property she didn't own. The choice became clear when I checked my email and found 17 messages from local residents who'd received invoices from Margaret's HOA, Special Assessment for Aviation Community Development, $5,000 per household, due immediately. Failure to pay would result in liens against their property. She was using her HOA position to force people to fund her illegal development. That wasn't just trespassing anymore. That was fraud, extortion, and racketeering. I started making calls, first to a security company to install cameras around both properties, then to a lawyer who specialized in property law and RICO cases, finally, to a contact at the FBI who handled white-collar crime in the Midwest. While I was on the phone, I noticed movement near the tree line. Someone with a flashlight was walking the boundary between my farm and the hidden airfield, occasionally stopping to take photos or measurements. Even in the darkness, I recognized Margaret's silhouette. She was scouting her kingdom, planning her empire, completely unaware that she was trespassing on land I'd owned for over a year. The irony was delicious. The woman who had torn up my grandfather's worthless dirt to build her runway to nowhere had no idea she was actually paving the path to her own destruction. The next morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer at 5 White Twine A. Bulldozers roared to life before the sun had even considered rising, their backup alarms piercing through my bedroom windows like auditory assault weapons. I stumbled out to the porch with my coffee to find Margaret already there, directing traffic like she was conducting the world's loudest orchestra. "Beautiful morning for progress, isn't it, Mr. Bennett?" she called out, her voice somehow carrying over the machinery. 3 days into this nightmare, and she'd already torn up 10 acres of my farmland. The eastern field looked like a war zone, all churned earth and diesel fumes. My neighbor's cattle had gathered at the fence line, watching the destruction with what I swore was disapproval in their eyes. What really caught my attention, though, were the new arrivals. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows had parked along the access road, and men in suits were walking the construction site with tablets, recording everything. These weren't local contractors or county officials. These had the bearing of serious money. "Investors?" I asked Margaret as she strutted past in her hard hat, which somehow looked designer despite being safety equipment. "Visionaries," she corrected. "People who understand the value of what we're building here." One of the suits approached us, extending his hand to Margaret, while completely ignoring me. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Harrison is very impressed with the progress. He's ready to increase his investment to $5 million for exclusive hangar rights." Margaret's eyes lit up like she'd won the lottery. "Excellent! We should have the airfield secured within the week." "Secured how?" I interjected. The suit finally acknowledged my existence with the kind of look you'd give a cockroach at a dinner party. "And you are?" "The owner of this land you're destroying," he chuckled. Actually chuckled, and pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Whitmore explained the situation. Squatters' rights, adverse possession, eminent domain. Plenty of legal avenues to resolve this minor inconvenience." "Minor inconvenience. Mr. Bennett, is it?" He scrolled through his phone. "I see here you purchased this property 3 days ago for significantly under market value. That suggests distressed sale, possibly tax liens or foreclosure. Courts tend to look unfavorably on opportunistic purchases intended to block community development." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like my ownership was just a temporary glitch in their matrix, made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. A skill 10 years of investment banking had beaten into me. Interesting legal theory. I assume you've done your due diligence on the Thunder Ridge property as well. The suit's eyes narrowed slightly. Thunder Ridge is abandoned property. The LLC that owned it dissolved last year. It's essentially free for development under Oklahoma Statute 46. Statute 46 deals with truly abandoned property, I said. Property where ownership cannot be determined. But if the assets of that dissolved LLC were transferred to specific parties, then it's not abandoned, is it? Margaret stepped between us. Mr. Harrison's representative doesn't need to waste time on hypotheticals. We have work to do. But I could see doubt creeping into the suit's expression. Mrs. Whitmore, you assured us there were no ownership complications with the airfield. There aren't, she said firmly. Mr. Bennett is grasping at straws. The suit studied me for a moment. You seem very knowledgeable about property law for a failed farmer. Failed farmer? I laughed. I've owned this place for 72 hours, and before that, Steel Holdings LLC, investment banking, mergers and acquisitions. The name of my old firm hit him like a punch. His face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, concern, before settling on professional neutrality. You were with Steel Holdings, he said slowly. The same Steel Holdings that bought Thunder Ridge Airfield in 2019. Yes, he turned to Margaret. We need to talk privately now. As they walked away, I heard him hissing something about material misrepresentation and fiduciary responsibility. Margaret's responses were too quiet to hear, but her body language screamed desperation. I stood there watching my corn get bulldozed, while millionaire investors argued about who actually owned what. The thing is, I could end this right now with one phone call to the sheriff. But watching Margaret squirm, seeing her realize her house of cards might collapse. Honestly, that was worth a few more acres of destroyed corn. Here's the question, though. If you were in my position, would you reveal the truth immediately, or let them dig themselves deeper into fraud? Drop a comment below and tell me what you do, because this next part gets seriously criminal, and I need to know if I'm handling it right. While Margaret dealt with her nervous investor, I noticed something interesting happening at the construction site. Workers were installing something that definitely wasn't part of a standard runway. Underground fuel tanks, 3 massive cylindrical containers were being lowered into excavated pits. The kind of setup you'd see at a commercial aviation facility. I walked over to the installation crew, pulling out my phone to record everything. Those look expensive. The foreman, a weathered guy named Dale, wiped sweat from his forehead. $40,000 each, not including installation. Mrs. Whitmore says it's for the future fueling station. She's planning to sell aviation fuel, full-service facility according to the plans. Fuel, maintenance, even a flight school. That requires federal licensing, doesn't it? Dale shrugged. Above my pay grade, I just install what they tell me to install. And who's paying for this? The HOA special fund plus private investors? Though between you and me, he lowered his voice. My cousin works at the bank, and he says the HOA account is running pretty thin, Mrs. Whitmore has been moving money around like crazy. This was escalating beyond simple trespassing and fraud. If Margaret was commingling HOA funds with private investments, using member dues for personal development projects, that was embezzlement and money laundering. I made another call to Bradley. I need you to do me a favor. Can you run a background check on Margaret Whitmore and any associated businesses? This about the Airfield situation, it's gotten complicated. How complicated? She's pre-selling hangar space at an airfield she doesn't own, using HOA funds to build infrastructure, and claiming government authority she doesn't have. Bradley whistled low. That's federal prison complicated. Can you check if she's done this before? Give me an hour. While I waited for Bradley's call, I decided to visit some neighbors. The Hendersons lived half a mile down the road, their pristine white farmhouse a stark contrast to my fixer-upper. Mrs. Henderson answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. "You're the new owner of the Bennett place. We've been meaning to come introduce ourselves, but with all the construction." "That's actually why I'm here. Has the HOA been causing you too many problems?" Her expression darkened. "You could say that. $5,000 special assessment due immediately, on top of the $3,000 we paid last month for community improvements that never happened." "What kind of improvements?" "Road repairs, landscaping, security upgrades. None of it materialized. The money just disappeared into the HOA account." Mr. Henderson joined us at the door, his face red with barely contained anger. "That woman's been bleeding this community dry for years. But she's got connections. Her brother-in-law is a county commissioner. Her lawyer plays golf with judges. People who fight her tend to lose their homes." "How many people?" "4 families that I know of personally. The Johnsons, the Millers, the Nguyens, and the Parkers, all forced out through escalating fines and legal harassment. And guess who bought their properties?" "Margaret? Her or her associates?" "Always through LLCs, always for below market value. A pattern was emerging, one that looked very familiar from my Wall Street days. Create a crisis, force a sale, acquire assets cheap, develop for massive profit. It was corporate raiding dressed up as community development." Bradley called back while I was driving home. "Jackson, you need to be careful. Margaret Whitmore isn't just some suburban HOA president with delusions of grandeur." "What did you find?" 3 previous developments in Texas and Arkansas, same pattern each time, become HOA president. Force out homeowners, acquire property, attempt development. The Arkansas one ended with her fleeing the state just ahead of fraud charges. She's done this before? Gets better. Her maiden name is Margaret Harrison. Harrison Development Group, ring any bells? My blood went cold. Harrison Development had been involved in one of the biggest real estate fraud cases in Texas history. That was her. Her late husband died in federal prison serving 20 for wire fraud and racketeering. Looks like Margaret learned the family business. Bradley, I need everything you can find on her. Financial records, court documents, anything. Already compiling it, Jackson. Be careful. People with this much to lose tend to get desperate. As if to underscore Bradley's warning, I returned to find my front gate chained shut with a heavy padlock. A notice was posted on it. Property seized for code violations. Unauthorized agricultural activity in Aviation Development Zone. Aviation Development Zone? She'd actually created a fictional zoning designation to justify locking me out of my own property. I called the sheriff's office, but the dispatcher sounded apologetic. Mrs. Whitmore filed an emergency injunction until a judge reviews it. We can't intervene. She can't just lock me out of my own property. I'm sorry. Mr. Bennett, you'll need to take it up with the court on Monday. Monday? It was Thursday afternoon. Margaret was trying to lock me out for 4 days while she completed her construction. I cut the chain with bolt cutters from my truck and drove through. If she wanted to play games with fake legal documents, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I'd seen enough fraudulent contracts in my banking career to spot fake paperwork from a mile away. The farmhouse was untouched, but I noticed fresh tire tracks leading toward the back of the property. Following them, I found something that made my jaw drop. A surveying crew was mapping out not just my farm, but creating detailed plans that extended into the Thunder Ridge property. They had aerial photos, topographical maps, and most tellingly, architectural drawings for a complete aviation community. "Excuse me," I called out to the lead surveyor. "Who authorized this?" He looked up from his equipment. Thunder Ridge Development, LLC. We have a work order right here. Thunder Ridge Development, LLC. Margaret had actually created a company named after property she didn't own. The audacity was breathtaking. Can I see that work order? He handed it over. It was signed by Margaret as managing director of Thunder Ridge Development. Dated a week ago, before I'd even bought the farm. She'd been so confident in forcing me out that she'd already started developing plans for property she didn't own. The plans themselves were ambitious to the point of delusion. 50 luxury hangars, a terminal building, fueling station, maintenance facility, and even a hotel. Total development cost was estimated at $38 million. These are impressive, I told the surveyor. How much has Mrs. Whitmore raised so far? According to our contract, she secured $12 million in commitments. $12 million based on fraud. This wasn't just a state crime anymore. This was federal wire fraud, mail fraud, and securities fraud if she'd crossed state lines soliciting investors. That evening, as the sun set over the destroyed cornfield, I sat down with my laptop and started documenting everything. Photos of the construction, copies of the fraudulent documents, recordings of conversations, financial estimates of the damage to my property. The file grew to over a gigabyte within hours. Margaret appeared around 9 p.m., strutting across my damaged field with two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a mob movie. Too much cologne, too much jewelry, and faces that suggested they solved problems with methods that didn't involve lawyers. "Mr. Bennett," she called out cheerfully, "I wanted to apologize for the gate situation. Overzealous security. I've come to make you a final offer. I'm listening. $500,000 cash tonight. You sign over both properties and disappear." "Both properties?" Her smile widened. "Don't play dumb. We know you have some claim to Thunder Ridge. $500,000 makes that problem go away. That's a $12 million property. It's worth nothing if you can't develop it. And trust me, after we're done with you, no bank will loan you a penny. No contractor will work with you. No government official will approve your permits." One of Margaret's companions stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore is being generous here. Smart money takes the deal." The threat was clear. Take the money or face consequences that went beyond legal harassment. But they'd made a crucial mistake, they just admitted, on my property where I had security cameras running, that they knew I owned Thunder Ridge and were trying to force me to sell it under duress. "I'll think about it," I said. Margaret's face darkened. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer drops to zero, and things get unpleasant." As they walked away, I heard one of the men say, "Should have taken the money, farm boy." Farm boy. If only they knew that this farm boy had orchestrated hostile takeovers of companies worth more than their entire town, that he'd sat across from CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and called their bluffs, that he'd once found a loophole in a contract that saved his firm $80 million. My phone rang. It was Sheriff Dale Morrison. No relation to Bradley, a man I'd met briefly at the gas station. "Mr. Bennett, I'm calling unofficially. Word is Margaret's planning something for tonight. Might want to make sure you're recording everything and maybe have witnesses around." "What kind of something?" "The kind where a property gets damaged and nobody sees who did it. Stay safe." I thanked him and immediately called Bradley. "I need you to come to Oklahoma tonight." "What's wrong?" "Margaret Whitmore just tried to buy me out for $500,000 cash, and I think she's planning to burn down my farmhouse if I refuse. I'll be there in 3 hours. Should I bring anything?" "A camera, and maybe a bulletproof vest." While waiting for Bradley, I did something that would either be brilliant or stupid. I posted everything online, every document, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd collected. I tagged local news stations, the FBI, the state attorney general, and, for good measure, a few aviation industry watchdogs who'd love a story about fraudulent airfield development. The post went viral within an hour. HOA president's massive aviation fraud exposed spread across social media like wildfire. Comments poured in from other victims of Margaret's schemes. People from Texas and Arkansas who'd lost their homes to her previous scams. My phone started ringing non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, and, most interestingly, some of Margaret's investors who just realized they'd been conned. Around midnight, I heard vehicles approaching. Not the subtle arrival of people trying to be sneaky, but the aggressive rumble of trucks that wanted you to know they were coming. Headlights swept across my windows like searchlights, and engines revved unnecessarily loud in the quiet Oklahoma night. Bradley had arrived an hour earlier, and we'd positioned ourselves strategically. He was upstairs with a camera recording from the window. I was on the porch, my phone ready, security cameras rolling. If Margaret wanted to escalate, she'd do it with a full audience. 3 pickup trucks pulled up, and out stepped Margaret with 6 men who looked like they'd been recruited from a casting call for generic thugs. The smell of alcohol wafted across the yard, liquid courage for whatever they had planned. "Mr. Bennett," Margaret called out, her voice slurring slightly. "Last chance to be reasonable. It's past midnight." "Margaret, this is harassment," she laughed, an ugly sound that echoed across the destroyed cornfield. "Harassment? You posted lies about me online. You're trying to ruin my reputation." "I posted documents." "Your own documents." One of the men stepped forward, carrying what looked like a gas can. "Lady says you're leaving tonight one way or another." The threat was so blatant, so poorly thought out, that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "You're aware I have security cameras running, right?" I pointed to the obvious cameras mounted on the porch, "and that my friend upstairs is live-streaming this to 12,000 viewers." The man with the gas can froze. Margaret spun around, looking up at the window where Bradley waved cheerfully, his camera's red recording light visible even from the ground. "You're making a mistake," Margaret hissed. "I have connections you can't imagine, judges, politicians, federal officials who owe me favors." "Federal officials?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the screen. "Like Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division? She's watching the live stream right now. Says hi. By the way," the color drained from Margaret's face so fast I thought she might pass out. Her thugs began backing toward their trucks, suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. "This isn't over," Margaret said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Actually, it is." I held up a manila folder. "This is a cease and desist order from federal court. Turns out building an airstrip without FAA approval is a federal crime. Add in the wire fraud, mail fraud, and RICO violations, and you're looking at about 20 years. "RICO?" Her voice cracked. "Racketeering, using an organization, your HOA, to conduct a criminal enterprise. Your husband went down for the same thing, didn't he?" The mention of her dead husband hit like a slap. Margaret stumbled backward, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking completely. "I want you off my property," I said calmly. "And if you or any of your associates come back, that live stream gets sent directly to the federal prosecutor." They left in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, truck engines roaring their displeasure into the night. Bradley came down from upstairs, grinning like we'd just won the lottery. 12,000 viewers turned into 30,000, he said. "The comments are brutal. Someone already made a meme of Margaret's face when you mentioned the FBI. This is going to get worse before it gets better," I warned him. "Probably. But did you see how fast those tough guys ran when they realized they were being recorded?" The next morning came with unexpected silence. No bulldozers, no construction crews, no Margaret strutting around like she owned the place. The work site sat abandoned, expensive equipment idle in the morning sun. I found out why when I checked my email. 17 messages from investors, all demanding to know if Margaret really owned Thunder Ridge Airfield. 3 messages from contractors saying they were pulling out of the project. 1 from the fuel tank company demanding immediate payment or they'd remove their equipment. The house of cards was collapsing, but Margaret had one more play. At 10 a.m., a convoy of official-looking vehicles arrived. Not construction trucks this time, but black SUVs with state government plates. Out stepped Commissioner Harold Whitmore, Margaret's brother-in-law, along with 4 other officials and a woman with a briefcase who screamed lawyer. "Mr. Bennett," the commissioner said, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed, "I'm here to discuss a matter of eminent domain. The HOA already tried that angle. I'm not here representing the HOA. The state of Oklahoma is prepared to acquire this property for public use." Public use? Economic development. The Thunder Ridge aviation community will bring jobs and tax revenue to the county. The lawyer opened her briefcase, pulling out documents. "We're prepared to offer you fair market value, $1.5 million for both properties. Thunder Ridge alone is worth $12 million. That's speculative value. We're offering based on current use assessment. And if I refuse?" The commissioner's friendly mask slipped. "Then we proceed with condemnation proceedings. You'll spend years in court, paying lawyers, fighting a battle you can't win. Meanwhile, development continues under state authority." This was Margaret's nuclear option, using her family connections to invoke actual government power. But she'd made a critical error. She'd involved the state in her fraud. "Commissioner Whitmore," I said slowly, "are you aware that your sister-in-law has already collected $12 million from private investors for this project?" His eye twitched. "Private investment is separate from state involvement. Not when she's been selling it as a state-backed project. I have recordings of her claiming government partnership, using state resources for promotion, even suggesting tax breaks that only you could authorize." The lawyer's face went pale. She whispered urgently in the commissioner's ear. "Additionally," I continued, "the FBI is already investigating the fraud aspects. If the state proceeds with eminent domain for a project under federal investigation, that could be construed as obstruction of justice." "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone, dialing a number. "Agent Walsh?" "Yes. Commissioner Harold Whitmore is here attempting to use eminent domain for the Thunder Ridge project. Yes, the one under investigation. He wants to speak with you." I handed him the phone. The conversation was short, consisting mostly of "yes, ma'am," and "I understand" from the commissioner. He handed the phone back, his face flushed. "This isn't over," he said. But he was already walking back to his SUV. "Actually," I called after him, "it is. Your financial disclosure forms show you're an investor in Thunder Ridge Development, LLC, using your official position to benefit your personal investment. That's corruption, Commissioner." He froze, turned slowly. "You have no proof of that." Bradley stepped out of the house, holding up his laptop. "Public records are beautiful things. Your investment is listed right here in the LLC filing." The commissioner and his entourage left faster than Margaret's thugs had the night before. The lawyer actually jogged to her car, already on her phone, presumably warning other clients to distance themselves from this mess. By noon, the collapse was complete. News vans arrived, setting up for live broadcasts. HOA president's $1 million fraud exposed, scrolled across screens. Margaret's photo, the one from her HOA president portrait, was shown next to headlines about corruption and racketeering. The sheriff arrived with a warrant for Margaret's arrest, but she'd vanished. Her house sat empty, her Bentley gone from the driveway, an all-points bulletin went out. But Margaret Whitmore had years of experience running from the law. What she'd left behind was chaos. Dozens of investors demanding their money back, contractors with unpaid bills, HOA members who had been assessed thousands of dollars for a project built on fraud, and in the middle of it all, my farm, with a half-built runway scarring its eastern edge. 3 days after Margaret's disappearance, I got a call from an unexpected source. Douglas Whitmore, Margaret's husband, not dead as Bradley's research had suggested, but very much alive and sitting in a federal minimum security prison in Texas. "Mr. Bennett, I heard about what Margaret did. I want to help." "Why would you do that?" "Because she let me rot in here for her crimes. I took the fall, thinking she'd wait for me. Instead, she took the money and ran. Started over with my brother's help. Your brother knew. Harold's been covering for her for years, helping her set up new scams, providing political protection. But here's what they don't know. I kept records. Everything. Every scam. Every bribe. Every fraudulent document. It's in a safety deposit box in Tulsa. He gave me the bank information and the box number. There's enough there to bury both of them. The next day, accompanied by FBI agents, I opened that safety deposit box. Inside were 15 years of meticulously documented crimes. Bank statements, forged documents, recorded conversations, even photographs of Margaret and Harold meeting with known criminals. The most damning piece was a recorded conversation from 6 months ago. Margaret discussing with Harold how to force me out once the farm went to foreclosure, how they'd already picked the property as perfect for their Airfield scheme. They'd orchestrated the previous owner's failure through escalating fines and harassment, driving him to drink and bankruptcy. I thought about old Mr. Bennett, no relation despite the shared name, who had lost everything to their schemes. The man had died 2 weeks after losing his farm, broken and defeated. With this evidence, the FBI moved fast. Harold was arrested at his office, led out in handcuffs as news cameras rolled. The image of a county commissioner being perp-walked made national news. Margaret was caught trying to cross into Mexico with a car full of cash. The arrest video went viral. The proud HOA president being handcuffed at a border checkpoint, screaming about persecution and demanding to speak to managers who didn't exist. But the real satisfaction came 2 weeks later at what was supposed to be Margaret's grand opening ceremony for the Runway. The community had still gathered, not to celebrate, but to figure out what to do with the mess she'd left behind. I stood on the same platform Margaret had commanded, looking out at hundreds of confused, angry, defrauded neighbors. The half-built runway stretched behind me like a scar, the fuel tanks sitting empty and useless, monuments to greed and delusion. "Folks," I began, "I know you're angry. You've been lied to, stolen from, manipulated. Margaret Whitmore promised you an aviation community that would transform your property values. Instead, she left you with debt and broken promises." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But here's the thing. We actually do have an airfield. Thunder Ridge exists, it's real, and it's commercially viable. The difference is, I actually own it, the crowd stirred with interest. I propose something different. Instead of a playground for the wealthy, we create something that serves everyone. A flight school offering scholarships to local kids, an air ambulance service for the regional hospital, agricultural aviation services that actually help farmers instead of destroying their fields. "What about our money?" someone shouted. "We invested millions." "The FBI is freezing Margaret's assets. You'll get restitution, though it might take time. But in the meantime, anyone who was defrauded can apply for free flight lessons at the school we're going to build. Consider it interest on your involuntary investment." The idea was audacious, turning Margaret's scam into something actually beneficial. But the crowd was warming to it, seeing possibility where there had only been loss. "The runway she built on my farm," I continued. "We'll complete it properly, legally, with FAA approval. It'll serve as an emergency landing strip and training facility. The fuel tanks? Perfect for agricultural aviation services." An elderly woman raised her hand. "Young man, why would you do this? You could just take your land and leave." Because Margaret was right about one thing. This community needs economic development. She just went about it through fraud and force. We can do it right, legally, with actual benefit to actual people. The crowd erupted in discussion, some skeptical, some hopeful, but all engaged in a way they hadn't been when Margaret was dictating terms. Over the following months, the transformation was remarkable. The FBI recovered nearly $8 million from Margaret's hidden accounts. The flight school was established with a board of local residents, not outsider investors. The first class of students included the previous farm owner's grandson, learning to fly on the land his grandfather had lost. Margaret was convicted on 17 federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering. The list read like a how-to manual for white-collar crime. The judge, noting her history of fleeing jurisdiction, sentenced her to 25 years without parole. At her sentencing, she still claimed she was a visionary, persecuted for trying to bring progress to backwards people. Harold got 15 years and lost his position, pension, and reputation. The news ran a special segment on corruption in county government. Using his case as the prime example, Douglas, Margaret's husband, got early release for cooperation and moved to Alaska, as far from Oklahoma as he could get while remaining in the country. A year later, Thunder Ridge Flight Academy was thriving. The runway on my farm had been properly completed and certified, serving as a training ground for student pilots. The Agricultural Aviation Service was helping farmers across 3 counties, providing crop dusting and surveying at rates that actually made sense. I kept farming the parts of my land Margaret hadn't destroyed. But now, with the added interest of watching student pilots practice approaches over my cornfields, the contrast between their careful, legal flights and Margaret's bulldozing chaos wasn't lost on anyone. The HOA was dissolved by court order, replaced with a voluntary community organization that actually served residents instead of exploiting them. The new president was Mrs. Henderson, whose first act was to return all the special assessments Margaret had collected. One afternoon, sitting on my porch, watching a student pilot execute a perfect landing on the runway Margaret had illegally started, Bradley asked me the question everyone wondered. Did you know about the Airfield when you bought this place? Honestly, no. The foreclosure was just good timing. Finding out about Thunder Ridge was pure luck. Lucky that you happened to own the exact thing Margaret was trying to steal. Lucky that her greed made her blind to actual ownership. She spent so much time scheming, she never did the basic research. What would you have done if you didn't own the airfield? I thought about it. Watching the sun set over my recovering farmland, probably the same thing. Document everything. Expose the fraud. Let her hang herself with her own rope. The airfield just made it more poetic. Poetic justice for a woman who thought she could steal the sky. The student pilot was practicing touch-and-go landings now. The sound of the small engine a gentle hum compared to the roar of Margaret's bulldozers. Each landing was legal, authorized, safe. Everything Margaret's scheme hadn't been. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Margaret had simply asked, if she'd approached me as a neighbor, proposed a partnership, offered to work together on developing the airfield I didn't even know I owned. We might have built something amazing together, legally and ethically. But people like Margaret don't ask. They take, they manipulate, they destroy. They believe their vision justifies any means, that their dreams matter more than other people's rights. The farm recovered faster than expected. The next season's corn grew tall and golden around the runway, creating a striking visual that actually attracted more students to the flight school. Nature and aviation coexisting rather than one destroying the other. Margaret's investors, those who hadn't fled to avoid prosecution, became some of the flight school's strongest supporters. They'd learned an expensive lesson about due diligence, but at least their money was finally going toward actual aviation development. The fuel tanks she'd illegally installed were repurposed for the agricultural service, finally serving their intended purpose after sitting empty for months as evidence in federal court. Even her mistakes found redemption in proper use. On the 2-year anniversary of that first confrontation, the flight school held its first graduation ceremony. 15 students received their pilot licenses, including 3 kids from farming families who'd never imagined they could afford flight training. The keynote speaker was the federal judge who'd sentenced Margaret, talking about how crime can sometimes inadvertently create opportunity for justice to flourish. He presented me with a commendation from the FBI for assistance in exposing corruption, though I pointed out that Margaret had really exposed herself. Your dead grandfather's worthless dirt became something magnificent, the judge said, referencing Margaret's opening threat. Just not the way she intended. As the ceremony ended and newly licensed pilots took their first solo flights over the Oklahoma farmland, I realized Margaret had been partially right. This land had been transformed into something special, but it happened through law and community, not through bulldozers and fraud. The runway she'd carved through my cornfield was now a symbol of redemption rather than destruction. Every plane that landed on it represented justice prevailing over corruption. Community triumph over individual greed. Margaret serves her time in federal prison, reportedly still claiming she was a misunderstood visionary. She writes letters to aviation magazines that never get published, proposing grand schemes that will never see daylight. Her world has shrunk to a cell, while the community she tried to exploit soars, sometimes late at night. I stand on that runway she illegally built and think about the irony of it all. She stormed onto my farm, believing she could take whatever she wanted, never realizing she was building the very thing that would destroy her. The runway through my farm remains, but now it represents everything Margaret wasn't. Legal, ethical, community-focused, and actually beneficial. Every successful landing is a reminder that doing things the right way might take longer, but it lasts forever. The corn grows tall around the runway now, and student pilots joke about the corn maze approach that makes landing here unique. They don't know the full story of how this runway came to be, and that's fine. The best revenge against someone like Margaret isn't eternal infamy. It's being forgotten while their failed schemes become foundations for real success. Thunder Ridge Flight Academy now trains 40 students a year. The Agricultural Aviation Service helps dozens of farms. The emergency landing strip has saved 3 lives, all built on the ruins of Margaret Whitmore's criminal empire. And my farm? It's exactly what I wanted when I bought it at that foreclosure auction: peaceful, productive, and mine. The fact that it came with a $12 million airfield and the chance to expose a massive fraud, that was just the universe's way of keeping things interesting. As for Margaret's famous last words about grateful residents and magnificent transformations, well, the residents are grateful now and the transformation is magnificent. She just isn't around to see it. Last month, I received a letter forwarded from the federal prison where Margaret serves her time. I almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. Inside was a single page, her handwriting still perfect despite everything. "Mr. Bennett," it began, "I've had considerable time to think about our conflict. You probably expect an apology. You won't get one. I still believe my vision was correct. The difference between us isn't about right and wrong, it's about methods. You had the luxury of already owning what I was trying to build. Easy to be ethical when you're holding all the cards. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she wasn't right either. The difference between us wasn't about what we owned. It was about how we treated what belonged to others." The letter continued. "That said, I read about your flight school in the prison library newspaper. 40 students a year, agricultural services, emergency medical flights. It's adequate. Though I would have done it bigger." Of course she would have. Margaret's problem was never thinking too small. "My daughter Ashley graduated from your program last year. She doesn't know I know. She changed her last name. Thinks I don't follow her progress. But a mother knows. She's flying for United now. You gave her wings when I would have caged her in my empire. For that alone, I suppose I should thank you. I won't, but I should." The letter ended without a signature. Just a federal inmate number. Ashley Whitmore, now Ashley Mitchell, had indeed been one of our best students. She'd shown up the day after enrollment opened, quiet and determined, never mentioning her connection to the woman who'd tried to steal everything. She'd earned her wings through merit, not sympathy or special treatment. I kept Margaret's letter, filed it with all the other documents from that strange chapter of my life. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the worst people are still people, complicated and contradictory, capable of both destroying communities and loving their children. The corn is coming in strong this season, growing around the runway Margaret carved through my land. Sometimes when I stand at the edge of that asphalt strip, watching the sunset paint everything gold. I think about how different things might have been with just a little less greed and a little more grace. But then a student pilot radios in for landing clearance, and I'm reminded that sometimes the best things grow from the worst intentions. Margaret's runway through my farm became exactly what she'd promised. Something magnificent. She just built it for the wrong reasons, in the wrong way, and ultimately for the right people.